I spoke up and I used my voice and I let go of that shame. I let go of that fear. I let go of that embarrassment. And I just said, I can't keep hiding this from the world. Like I'm
Yeah.
suffering and, going through something so traumatic, I knew that I couldn't start healing from it on my own. And I knew I needed to lean on support. I needed to lean on my family.
Welcome to Good Enough with the Trauma Therapist, a podcast dedicated to empowering you to take control of your life, learning valuable strategies for healing, and looking at mental health through a trauma-informed lens. Get ready to feel empowered and confident in managing your symptoms. And now, here is your host, licensed clinical social worker, EMDR therapist, and certified clinical trauma professional, Jamie Vollmoeller.
Welcome to Good Enough. I am your host, Jamie Vollmoeller, and today we have Lianne Torres with us. Leanne is a podcaster, speaker, and advocate for domestic violence survivors. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she overcame an abusive relationship that almost took her life and embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing. Through her podcast, Watch Us Thrive, Leanne provides a platform for sharing stories of overcoming trauma and encourages healing by engaging in tough conversations, which is so needed. Her work is dedicated to empowering the voiceless by turning pain into power. Welcome, Leanne. How are you?
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. So for me as a trauma kid, I think that when you do have a connection to this field and the work that we do, sharing our story, and obviously that's what your whole podcast is about, is a really powerful way um, to just destigmatize what we've been through and help other people find their voice as well. So I would love for you to share like how you went from DV survivor to DV advocate.
Oh, it's been a journey. Okay. This is not something that has happened overnight, but I've been able to build this mindset of what I went through was a blessing in disguise. And, you know, when I think about it, I'm grateful for the trauma. I I could have like not dealt with it, but because I went through what I went through, it has brought me here today to sit down and have this conversation with you. It's the reason
Yeah.
why I started my podcast. It's the reason why I'm growing a community of fellow survivors, not just of domestic violence, but just people who have gone through some shit,
Hmm.
and we want to come together as a collective and talk about it and bring it to the forefront and allow other people to not feel so alone in their own pain and suffering, because when I was in that situation, I felt so alone. No one knew what was happening until the night that he almost killed me. That's the first time that I spoke up and I actually told someone what was going on. But yeah, man, when I just think about everything that I've gone through, even besides that relationship, I'm grateful for it all because it has built me into this badass woman that I am today. And I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't go through what I went through back then.
I resonate with that so deeply. I mean, I think I say all the time, like I've had clients say to me where they get triggered is that people say like, "Oh, well, it made you stronger." But I think when we're saying that, right, those of us that take that approach to our trauma is I feel like I have superpowers from my trauma that, like,
Yes.
the general public doesn't have. Like,
Yes.
I'm really good at micro expressions. I'm really good at reading body language. I'm really good at understanding human psychology. And that was long before school because
Yes.
my brain was just wired to learn all of
Yep.
that to protect myself, right?
Exactly.
So it's just embracing that, like, okay, if I didn't go through this, I wouldn't have all the skills that I have today. I probably wouldn't be as driven as I am today. I probably wouldn't have anything to prove, and I'd be a really different human. And I like
Yeah.
the human that I
Yeah,
am. So,
exactly. And it's easy to like go the opposite way and not have that mindset of turning your pain into your power. Like I could have easily repeated the same thing that I went through in another relationship. I could have
yeah.
easily not deal with the emotions, not deal with the healing, just put like a temporary band-aid over a wound. Like that's what I was doing before. But it really took for me, like you said in the intro, for me to almost lose my life. That was my wake-up call. That was like my come to Jesus moment that all right, some shit has got to change because this is a pattern that is repeating. And this situation that you were in, it almost killed you. So what are we going to do to heal from that? What are we going to do to not repeat the same cycle over and over again?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about your history, Leanne. So did you have kids at this time? Do you have kids now?
I
Because
do
that
have one
also
daughter.
okay,
Yeah.
because I know that also complicates
Oh,
things
yeah,
when
yeah,
you're in a
for sure.
devious situation, for sure.
Absolutely. So she is not his child. She's almost 15, so I have a teenager. And I thank God that she was not around when I was in that abusive relationship. I was living in Florida at the time, and she was back home with my family, which is where I am now. But, I'm a single mom. I've had really toxic, shitty relationships in my life. Not as abusive as the last one, but just chaos and disrespect and just unhealthy relationship dynamics is something that I was very used to. Like, that's just something that I continuously found myself in over and over and over. I was kind of like dating the same person, but in a different body. And this last one was like the worst of them
Of
all.
the
And that's the
worst.
one that was like, all right, some shit has got to change because this here,
It's not cutting
it's not it. It's a
it.
hamster wheel that I keep finding myself on. I'm just like, "Nah, we gotta do something different."
Yeah, I feel that, and that's so powerful, and especially if you, like, came from a traumatic childhood where, like, that kind of behavior was normalized, and then we've been in all these other relationships where it's like, "Well, it's not like I've been through it before, I've been through worse, it's not gonna get that bad," and we kinda just rationalize, push
Yeah.
it down. So I mean, I know when my mom left, it was a situation like that that caused her to leave.
Mm,
I know for a lot of the women that I've worked with, it usually takes it becoming, like, blatantly obvious that this is not salvageable,
yes.
that you need to leave to protect yourself and your
Yes.
kitties,
Absolutely.
or, they don't leave because they're just hopeful and part of it I think is the hope that they'll change, right? Or the hope that you'll get them to love you. And I think the other part of that is the fear that this is all I've ever known and I'm not going to get anyone better. So
Yes. Oof.
what am I walking into otherwise?
Yes.
but
Yes.
but
Absolutely.
as you're telling this, like I love that you're taking accountability for like okay, these are my patterns, right? I am not responsible for what these men did to me, but I am responsible for continuing to ignore the signs that this shit is going down, right?
Yes.
So, one of the things I loved when you were like, "Hey, can I come on?" is you were very much about people taking accountability for their role in whatever cycles are playing out for them, which I know a lot of people push back on, but I feel the same because it's like we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. And if we start looking at what patterns we have, right, then we can prevent ourselves, hopefully, from doing
Yes.
the same dumb shit over and over
Yes.
again.
Yes. You are speaking my language, and this is something that I speak so much on my own platform. Taking accountability, not for what he did, like you said, but for my choices, me choosing to stay the first time he put his hands on me, the first time he cheated on me, the first time he disrespected me or called me out of my name. That's what I'm taking responsibility for because I didn't love myself enough to walk away. And that's something that I realized when I started doing the inner work that we talk about in this personal development space. It's like, what was it about me that I felt this type of behavior was okay? And when you get to that awareness and also accepting the situation for what it is and not focusing so much on what you think it could be. Like, I
Yeah.
was someone who I fell in love with potential. I created this persona, this I idealization of like what he could be
Yeah.
and not taking him for what he was bringing to me. His words and his actions weren't matching up, but I was just like, "You know what? I can fix him. I can save him. I can show him something that he's never had before." And I know so many of us women especially, we have that mindset because we're nurturers. We do
Yeah.
want to, we come into these types of relationships from a place of love and a place of like just wanting to do, but then we lose ourselves in the process when we are with those type of people who are really just opportunists, who are really just trying to, control you and manipulate and do anything to benefit them and not worrying about how you're losing yourself in the process.
Yes. Amen to all
Yeah.
of that. Amen.
I've done a lot of work, guys, okay?
No, I think that's so, so true, and
Yeah.
I don't know you, Leanne, before this,
Yeah.
but what you're saying is something that a lot of my clients also struggle with is that empathic nature of like, "Oh, but he's
Yeah.
traumatized, and all of these things happened,
Yeah.
and I just have to have compassion, and I just have to love him more, and if I do this right, then
Fuck
I."
that.
Yeah, like, it's oh,
It's
but
exhausting.
it's exhausting, but it's there.
Yeah.
So, for the clients that you work with, right, like, so I think accountability can be really, really hard, because to me, it's not even so much that you didn't leave then, right? It's more like, okay, I'm going to take accountability going forward that I'm going to respect myself enough to have any boundaries,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not that you were wrong per se for saying, because in your heart at that time, you didn't know
I didn't know any
what
better.
was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't think that was even in the realm of
Yeah.
possibilities. Like, so to blame ourselves for that isn't healthy, but it is something to say, okay, I now see this pattern and I can take accountability for knowing what the red flags have been in the past and having some real clear boundaries with myself that if I see this at all in the relationship, that it's going to be,
Yes.
this is a breaking point, or this is a
A deal
firm
breaker. Yep.
boundary, or yeah,
Yep.
because I think that's very common in DV too, which is why women stay, especially because so many abusers, like you said, if you're an empath and you have a narcissistic man who, fills you up every time you're ready to go and you're done, and I have many women in my family and family clients
Yep.
that they fill you with all this praise and love and you're the best thing in the world. And then you seem content. So then they back off and they start treating you like garbage
Mm.
again. And then it's just the same
Over and
over and
over.
over and
That's
over.
literally the relationship that I was in, and I didn't realize that when I was in it, obviously. But once I left and I really dove deep into the world of DV and, narcissists and love bombing and gaslighting and all these things. It's very trendy nowadays to
Yeah.
talk about, but literally that was my relationship. Like when I first met him, and this was happening during COVID, you guys. I met this man the end of April 2020, and I left the relationship in March of 2021. So it was a very short-lived relationship, but it was very fast. The
Mm,
lockdown, we were around each other 25/8, and I didn't really know this person. It was very much a relationship that was driven off of the physical, like
mhm,
lust and just, oh my God, this man is so out of my league. Like, I don't deserve to be with someone who looks as good as him. That's how I felt about
mhm,
myself, right? And in the beginning, I thought I found like my Prince Charming. Like I said before, I had really a cycle of just toxic relationships, and I thought like this is finally it's my turn. I finally found the one. And he was great at pretending to be, Mr. Knight in shining armor, but after a while he couldn't pretend to be that. Like he couldn't keep up with it anymore. And slowly the mask that he was wearing was coming down and the real person behind it was coming to the forefront. And I did ignore the red flags in the beginning. I did, you know, fall in love with the potential and I did stay, but it took for me to almost die to wake the fuck up and be like, okay, we got to take a step back. We got to start working on ourselves and stop trying to pour into everyone else when I'm over here dried up like the fucking Sahara Desert. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 'cause you're just giving, 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 and you got nothing left to give, and
Yep.
it's just still never enough.
Yep.
But I think the fact that it happened during COVID though too, in your defense, is probably worse, right? Because I know so many women during COVID, the rates of DV just went up
Yep.
astronomically
Yep.
because we're all so isolated. We were
Hmm.
all isolated. So it's not like, if you had bruises on you, like your spouse might think twice when you were going to work every day, but
Right.
when you're stuck home, and you're not seeing your family and you're not seeing your friends, like it's a lot easier
Yes.
to to keep it concealed, right? And they
Absolutely.
know that.
Absolutely.
And then, usually following, like I said, every single one of those blow ups is a apologetic, I love you, I didn't mean it, it wasn't me, it was my
I
anger, and
never
I'm
got
gonna
that, by
work
the
on
way.
it.
I never got an apology afterwards. He was the type
Oh,
of person that
Jesus.
had no accountability.
Oh my
He
God.
I found out after leaving that my sister actually ran a background check on him, and he is a habitual offender in and out of prison
Oh,
for the same type of charges of DV and assault and all of these things that I knew nothing about when I was with him. He was very secretive about his past, and anytime I tried to, like, pull his teeth to get something out of him, he would shut
yeah.
down. He would shut down, he would stonewall me, he would do, you know, me trying to invade his privacy, like, that was a trigger for him, and that's when it would get abusive too, like, if I overstepped his boundary. So I didn't
Mhm.
know about any of that until after leaving, but, I mean, a lot of times when it comes to these situations, these people have done this before, and they will do it again, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're just gonna keep repeating it until they're put away,
Yes.
unfortunately,
Yep.
or, they'll just keep cycling through.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's, unfortunately, the world that we live in where women are just chronically unprotected.
Yep.
So you did say that your sister-in-law found something. Is there a resource for our listeners that if they suspect that they have a maybe verbally abusive and sometimes like overly handsy, but not necessarily what people classify in their brains as abuse, is there a database that women can look up, or even men, because DV happens with men too, um,
Yes.
uh, to see if this person is on this list, so they
Yes.
have like this fair warning.
Yes. She actually sent this to me. It's called vinelink.com. VINELINK.com.
Okay.
You literally put in the state, if you know your partner's first and last name and the last state that they lived in, put that into this website and it can literally show you if they have any sort of criminal record.
Okay.
Luckily or unluckily for me, my ex, like I said, is a habitual offender and he has a long list. So he was very
Mhm.
easily findable um in this situation, but I mean, I think you should just Google anyone. Especially like if you're dating like me, I'm not dating right now, but when I do decide to go back out there, I'm going to Google you. I'm going to run a background check. I'm going to do my research because I didn't do that with this last relationship. And I think if I would have, if I had that mentality back then, this probably wouldn't have happened if I came across the things that are associated with my ex. But you live and you learn, this is a situation that I had to go through in order to learn from. But I
Yeah.
think it's so important for people to like, especially if you're online dating,
Mm.
catfishing is real. People can
Yeah.
pretend to be someone that they're not, and I think it's empowering for especially as women to like do your due diligence. It's not like, you're being paranoid or you're doing too much. Like, no, you want to protect yourself. You've been through some shit, and it's just allowing you to see, is this type of person I want to associate myself with or not? How are they showing up on social media? You know, you can find out so many things by just a simple Google search.
Yes, you
That's what
can.
I've learned about my whole situation. I'm gonna fucking Google you, okay?
Well, that I think is overall good advice too, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna drop that link in the show notes as well because I do think it's helpful. But something you said also sparked something in my brain, and now I can't remember.
It's okay, it'll come back.
It'll come back. It'll come back, girl. Um, so yeah, I think that one of the things that I've heard you speak on is like why it's important to speak up. and ask for help. So, as a survivor and now an advocate, from both perspectives, why is it so important?
because it can literally save your life. Like me, when I escaped my relationship that night on March 12th, 2021, I showed up at my best friend's apartment. Shout out to Giovanna. I love to shout her out anytime that I can.
Mhm.
It was like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm banging on the door like if I'm the police. She opens up and she sees that I've been through some shit. Like I was not in a good place and you could see that. And she was the first person that I told what was happening. She's the reason why I called 911. She's the reason why he is now in prison for what he did to me and is serving his time. And I was able to get some sort of justice because I spoke up and I used my voice and I let go of that shame. I let go of that fear. I let go of that embarrassment. And I just said, I can't keep hiding this from the world. Like I'm
Yeah.
suffering and, going through something so traumatic, I knew that I couldn't start healing from it on my own. And I knew I needed to lean on support. I needed to lean on my family. Shout out to my family because if they weren't here, I probably wouldn't be here. But just leaning so much on the people in your circle that you really don't know have your back until you're put in situations for them to
Yeah.
show up for you, that literally saved my life. So that's why I'm so adamant about just telling one person what's going on, you know?
Mhm.
And then you can come together and create some sort of safety plan. I understand that every situation is different. You have kids, you're married, you're being financially abused and you have no resources. There's so many different aspects when it comes to it. But for me in my situation, it was dire. It was like a life and death decision that I made in the
Yeah.
split moment. And I knew I needed support. And I got that by speaking up and talking about it.
Yeah, and I think even before we're hoping that women leave before they
Yeah.
get to that life or death situation because there are so many women that don't come out of those situations
Yes.
alive. Um, but just even that what you were talking about earlier with that constant like love bombing and then berating and the back and forth, the mind games and the manipulation, right? It so distorts our realities so that it's really easy to believe like maybe I'm the crazy one.
Yep.
Maybe I did do something that warranted this crazy response.
Yep.
And if we're not speaking about it, then there's no one to tell you no, girl,
Yeah.
run.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
even if it's just like you said, a friend or like there are so many, I'm gonna make sure to put in the show notes like DV hotlines and
Yeah.
everything for anyone who this resonates with, because I want you guys to have the resources. But there are plenty of hotlines. There are plenty. It's state by state, but I mean, in New York, we have tons of DV resources. There is resources for housing. There's resources like for no contact housing. They'll give you your own phone. They will pay for therapy services. Like
Yep.
in New York State, if a crime is committed against you and your insurance won't cover a good therapist that does like real trauma therapy, not just like that talk therapy nonsense,
Right.
um, New York State will pay for you to go get counseling, like
Yes.
with a trauma specialist. Like there are
Yes.
so many resources at your disposal when you do speak up, and it makes it so much easier. And for women with children, I really want to say it is so important to document,
Yes.
because once you get to court and you leave and there is no documentation, I can tell you from people in my that I'm very close to my personal life that it is he said, she said.
Mhm.
If there are no police reports, if there is nothing documenting all of this long-standing abuse, that is how the court unfortunately views women
Yes. Yes.
in those situations. And especially if you have very, very young children who can't testify to what they saw on your behalf, because let's say they're under a certain age where they don't know the difference between the truth and a lie,
Yeah.
you're pretty much shit out of luck.
Yep.
And now you have the anxiety of, if I leave, this man has rights to see my children without me present.
Yep.
And that's a whole nother host of fears.
Absolutely.
So, for some woman, I think you're very lucky that you were able to just like get
Yes.
out like a bat out of hell. But I
Yes.
know that there are clients in our practice now that are in these types of situations and they're preparing to leave, right? They're like, okay, finding housing, finding these supports, getting all of their ducks in a row because they know that as soon as that person finds out, that is when it's most dangerous to leave. Once they know you're going to
Absolutely.
leave, you are in grave danger. So if you are not fully ready to pull that trigger, you should definitely be talking to someone. And there are so many advocacy centers across the country that will help you to plan for that and help you to do it safely and find a timeline where it's going to be the least amount of chance of him stopping you or holding the kids or it turning into a catastrophe.
Yep.
Because it is the most dangerous time in a domestic violence situation when a woman leaves the
Yep.
situation.
Yep. Because that control, that power that they have over you, it's no more. So they're
Yeah.
willing to do any and everything. That's when the stalking increases even more. I mean, I'm grateful that it happened in Florida and they're very strict when it comes to domestic violence. So he has been in prison since the the 12th of March 2021. Like he's been sitting in a cell, he's been sitting in a box, and I know that I'm safe and there's many, many miles in between us. So when he gets out, I'm not worried about that anymore. But I'm very, very grateful for how everything ended up with me. And I know that's not the reality. When it comes to the criminal justice system, it's very much against victims and it
Mhm.
supports the perpetrators. I mean, that's
Yeah.
another conversation for another day. But I appreciate you for bringing up the documentation, especially if you're sharing kids or property with this person. Like, it's very important for you to do it discreetly and to have at
Mhm.
least one person knowing that this is happening. So that way, when you do decide to leave, you at least have someone in your corner to support you because you cannot do this alone. You
No.
can't. This is not a situation that you're going to be able to handle on your own. So that support, that community, at least one person. And I mean, we have so many resources at our disposal when it comes to this, like these cell phones. Literally, these things can save your life. And we have the opportunity to. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. The fuck is calling me? My daughter. Sorry. But yeah, we have the opportunity to protect ourselves and to help ourselves by just speaking up and saying, I need fucking help. I can't do this alone.
Well, and I think a lot of people struggle with that because for a lot of us, especially like survivor trauma kids who always had to figure it out on their own,
Yeah,
seeking help first off feels really vulnerable
yeah,
and we're fearing that rejection. But on the other hand of that, there's this perception if I need help, then I must be weak. And I think as someone who works with people who pour their heart, like it is a very you have to be a very strong person to come forward and
yeah,
say like, "Hey, I'm in a shit situation
yeah,
and I need some help right now."
yes,
Because it's not easy because if you're doing it right, right? Like if you really want the help, you have to be honest about like we were saying before, like your role in this and you know, in those situations we're talking about abuse and chronic stress.
yeah,
So I have worked with many women who have been in abusive situations and they'll be like, but I hit him back. And then they're like, but then they can press charges on me. And I'm like, you're
mhm,
defending yourself.
yep,
But when you're in that relationship, everything that you do, that well, you're verbally abusive because you said this. And it's like, dude, you said that because again, you're in chronic stress where someone is continually gaslighting you
yep,
and making you feel unsafe and not respecting your personal boundaries, your physical boundaries, your sexual boundaries.
yes,
And you're going to defend yourself in ways that you're not proud of. But that is also like entirely normal for PTSD. That is
yes,
entirely normal for being in a situation where your safety is put in danger.
yeah,
No one is going to be put in an unsafe situation and be like, "May you please stop pounding on me, sir?"
right,
Like,
right,
it's just not gonna happen.
yeah,
The New
yeah,
Yorker in me is gonna be like, "I'm gonna
right,
gouge your eyes out now."
right,
Like,
exactly,
not
exactly,
happening.
yes, we're not dealing with that shit. I think it's an up north thing because I'm from Jersey, so yeah, I understand.
I think it also just like my mom was a single mom most of my life, and she was always like, "You don't need a man for shit." So it's
Mhm.
like very much the mentality I was
Yep.
raised with, which like no one puts hands on you and you defend yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Not that you put hands on people first. We don't put
Right.
hands on people first.
But if
I'm gonna
some
sit
shit
there.
needs to be handled, we're
We're gonna
gonna
handle it.
handle it.
We're gonna handle it.
Yes.
I think that's why New Yorkers, like, when people run their mouth, they're like, Be careful who you run
Yeah.
your mouth to."
Exactly. Exactly. Because you're gonna fuck around and find out.
Loving it, girl. All
Yeah.
right. So you offer your listeners in your community a lot of tools that you have learned along this journey, right? So I am not a victim of domestic violence. I've worked with a lot of women, but I do think that someone who has personal experience about it, I always love to hear what worked best for you. Not that it'll work for everyone that
Right.
hears it, but I think there's something special about highlighting your situation. And sometimes when there's a lot of overlap, it tends to be the same strategies that work,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So what are some of those tools, Leanne?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been talking about it, leaning on support first and foremost, speaking up, having at least one person in your corner. And I actually do have a free guide that we can leave in the show notes. It's called the Thrive
Sure.
Guide, 10 steps on how to heal from trauma after experiencing abuse. And one of the things that actually one of the life coaches that I worked with that's was so impactful was writing a letter of forgiveness, and not to him, but to myself. Forgiving myself for what I allowed, forgiving myself for not loving myself, forgiving myself for all of these things that I was holding on to. She had me do that, write it out in a really beautiful journal that I got myself. And then she wanted me to look in the mirror and read it to myself. And when I
Oh.
tell you the crying, like I was Kim Kardashian ugly crying, okay? Like snot everywhere, like hyperventilating, but it was such a release that I didn't know my body needed, my emotions needed. And
Mm.
then to, put the cherry on top of the cake, she wanted me to get rid of it, either shred it or burn it to symbolize like we are releasing and we are letting this go and we are moving on from the ugliness that you felt about yourself. So I
Yeah.
highly recommend. I chose to burn it because I just seeing something turn into ash and dust is just so fucking therapeutic for me. Not that I'm
Yeah.
like a pyro, okay, I'm not, but just it was such a beautiful experience for me to allow that to just come out of me. So I recommend anyone when you get to that point, because this took me a while to get to that point. I was working with her for a while before we built up the confidence within me to do that. But when you do decide to get to that step, I'm telling you, it's gonna change your fucking life. And then later down the line, I did write a letter of forgiveness to my ex, and I did the same thing, but I read it to my daughter. We had this thing that we did it together the end of December
Mm.
2022. We wrote letters of forgiveness to the men in our lives that hurt us, and she wrote a letter to her father, who has not been in her life for a very long time. And we cried and we burned it, and it was just such a beautiful experience to just let go and just close those chapters. And it's really not about that person, but it's about yourself. It's about forgiving yourself and loving yourself and healing your wounds and really getting rid of all the ugly shit that's living inside of you. I highly recommend. I mean,
Oh,
journaling,
yeah.
it can change your life.
Very much agree. You're
Yeah.
actually like, it's funny, I recorded a podcast earlier today and someone else was saying the same, like different population entirely, but like write down a letter to yourself and
Yeah.
then like set it on fire. And I'm like, I've done that with clients. It's like
Yes.
the best thing.
It's the best.
Um, I love that because it's first off, writing a letter of forgiveness to yourself is really, really important because I think the reason that so many of us stay in those situations is because we blame ourselves, right? So if we continue to blame and berate ourselves,
Yep.
we're not going to get very far in our healing journey because
Yes.
we are talking to ourselves like all the other abusers in our life
Yep.
have talked to us.
Yep.
So how are we going to heal from that? That's
Yes.
not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we need to learn to just be okay with like, I was doing the best that I could do with the information that I had at the time.
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to do to move forward and protect ourselves. And these are um, the things and the dedications to like, these are the things I'm going to try to believe about myself in the
Yeah.
future. And I'm going to
Yeah.
try to make these commitments to do better by myself in these ways. And that's really beautiful. Writing a letter of forgiveness to the person, I think it's for me, when we don't forgive them, it's usually we're holding on to so much anger.
Hmm.
And it's that anger that we're really trying to release. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean that you forgave this man, and I don't think you'll ever want to see him ever again
He
in your life.
couldn't even be around my energy now. Like, you can't even be in my space.
Not permitted.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't mean that you're like, "Oh, I forgive him," or like for whoever did it, because there are plenty of people that have survived abuse or assault situations,
Yeah.
and it's like family members, right? That
Yes.
it's people that they are very, very close to. It does not mean that you then, because you forgave them, you have to have any sort of relationship with
Yep.
them. It's really releasing yourself from their power to continue to put you in that state
Yep.
of fear, of anger. It's that anger to me when I was angry at people in my life. It was a way that it felt like they still had control.
Yep.
They were still running the show even though they weren't there.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. It's like they were the puppeteer and you're the puppet, just still doing whatever it is that they want. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And I think when we, for me, that's what we mean when we say forgive the person that hurt. It's of letting go of it. And like,
Yeah.
like I am no longer giving my energy to this thing
Yeah.
that had dominated my life for so long and continued to occupy so much of my headspace.
Yeah.
Because even when we're out of these situations, we ruminate, we predict the future based on like it's all of these things that
Yes.
keep coming up and up and up. And the only way to let that go is to just be like, all right, I know I'm safe now. I'm going to let go of this anger so that he doesn't have control over me anymore.
Yes. Yes. And I think when like you do write that letter of forgiveness specifically to yourself, when you see physically the shit that you're saying to yourself, that's really like a oh shit reality check for me. Like when I read what I was thinking about myself, I was like, damn,
Yeah.
this is really fucking ugly. No
Yeah.
wonder I was feeling like shit about myself. No wonder I was in this type of situation because look at how I'm talking about myself. Look at how I think about myself. And when you have, again, like we talked about before, that awareness, that's
Yeah.
really when the work can start happening. But you gotta sit in your shit, you guys. I hate to break it to you. I mean, Jamie, I know you can speak on this because you're a professional, but like if you really want to heal your shit, heal your wounds, you gotta just live in it for a moment and accept it for what it is. You can't just keep burying it under the rug or like drink it away or fuck it away or whatever it is. Like you gotta deal with it in
Yeah.
order to start moving through it. That's how you heal.
Yeah. Well, and I think so because you're in your healing journey,
Yeah.
you've had to sit with it. And I'm sure you did not want to sit with it, right?
Hell
Like,
no.
hell no, right? I feel that. So, because I really, I had my own trauma and I've been in therapy for a long time. And there are times where I will like literally be like, I don't want to go to therapy today.
Mhm,
I don't want to deal with
mhm,
this. Like,
mhm.
and I know my clients get that way too when we do heavy stuff because
Yeah,
it's so emotionally taxing. But it's like we stay in these patterns because we're not acknowledging, right? We're ignoring, we're pushing down, we're not letting ourselves like be in our bodies. Like
yeah,
for me, that was a really big thing because my whole life I've been on high alert. So my body is always like chronic stress mode, feel like I'm vibrating high alert.
yep.
So being in my body, not how I coped as a kid. I coped by like being in sports, playing outside, like I was always busy, right?
Mhm,
And even as like in my early 20s, I was in college, I was working, I was still always busy.
yep.
And then I got a career and we're still working like 2, 3 jobs,
Mhm,
always busy. Like,
yep.
and it was really, I became that's how I coped with my trauma. I was like, oh, I don't need to focus on me. I'm just too busy to focus. Like, I'm too busy and successful to
Yep.
focus on any of my own
Yep.
crap, right? Like, we make those
Yep.
kinds of excuses too.
Mhm.
But it's like, I I I kept being in these patterns, and I'm like, "Bro, you're a therapist. Like, how do you keep doing?" And I like literally had to be like, "Oh, okay, girl, you
Yeah.
you need to do what you're telling your clients to do, and
Yeah.
like sit in your stuff and do
Yeah.
this deeper work." And it really is uncomfortable, especially when you first start sitting with that body discomfort. At least for me, like my chest will get when I remember
Oh,
these
yeah.
things, my chest gets tight. My throat starts to close when it's
Mhm.
really bad. Like, Imma cry my eyes out, and I don't like to cry because I
Yeah.
feel weak when I cry, even
Yeah.
though it's not a weak thing to cry, and sometimes we just need to cry.
Yes.
I actually had a colleague tell me, she's like, "I feel like right now you just need, like, a once a week cry check-in where you just call me and cry and release all your emotions because you
Yes.
put them in boxes all the
Mhm.
time." But, when we release it, we can move forward because and then when we are aware of that and we're not ignoring those voices anymore, then they can start alerting us to these things before they become major crises, right? Like,
Yes.
because we're aware, like, oh, that like anger is coming up for me. And anger is an emotion for me that the boundary setter in me, like that usually means that someone's crossing a boundary or did something that makes us feel uncomfortable. And I would ignore that a lot because clearly I'm a New Yorker. So I get when I get angry, it's not it's not pretty. Like my
Right.
mom is like, "You're a true Gemini. Like you either like everyone either loves you or
Yep.
hates you,
Yep.
and you don't want to be on your bad side
Yes.
because like my eyebrow goes up. She warns that this is my devil horn, guys.
Yes.
She's like, "You're like half angel, half devil." But like
Mhm.
if I'm backed into a corner, I'm a trauma kid. I'm gonna come for the jugular. Like
Yes.
it's not something I'm proud of, it's gonna happen. Like, so I think for years for me, like knowing that, I pushed that response down. But then what started happening in my 20s was like I kept being like put in these situations that really didn't feel good for me.
Mm.
And it was like, oh, it's because you're ignoring this part of you that keeps telling you that you need to set a boundary, and
Yep.
then you feel bad and you people please, and then you blow up. So we need to work on that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
thankfully, in my 30s, I am much better at that.
Yes.
Um,
But
but it
you
really
chose to
is.
do the work. You're doing the work, and that's commendable because like you said, it's not fucking easy. It's not easy.
Yeah.
This healing journey, I will never claim to be healed
Yeah.
because life is always going to throw shit at you, but I'm able to bounce back a lot quicker than say 3 years ago.
Yep.
If you would have talked to me 3 years ago, it would have been a completely different fucking conversation, right? But I just think this is a journey that we're both going to be on for the rest of our lives, and us coming together and talking about it, it's going to help someone else because I know people are going to see themselves in our stories. So shout out to
Oh,
us to doing this fucking work.
yeah. Well, and for me, like, as a parent, right,
Yeah.
I think that's also why I really got into the work. Because having a kid, I started seeing a lot of the stuff that was
Mhm.
like, "Ooh, I sound like my mom there."
Mhm.
"Ooh, I didn't like eating," like,
Yes.
"Ooh, I don't wanna be part of this pattern too,"
Yep.
right? And I think that's when I got really, really deep into it because when we experience trauma, especially if it's in our childhood home, but even if it's just like, even if you didn't have trauma in your childhood home, but you experienced like an assault or you were in a domestic violence situation or you went off to work, it affects our nervous system regulation. If we have PTSD,
Yep.
we are not going to respond like the sane, sound humans that are operating in our
Yes.
logical brains because we're in fight or flight mode.
Yep.
So if we're not doing that work, what really terrified me was like, I don't want my kids to grow up like this. I don't want them to
Mhm.
ever feel how I did. And not that we can always prevent that either, guys. We can't. But what you said before, Leanne, is important. It's that for me, that healing, it's not that I'm ever healed, right? I'm always doing work. I'm always trying to get better. And I think that's just the human condition, right? There's always stuff we can improve in. And if you don't think there is, maybe you need a better therapist. I don't know. But
Yeah.
that's just my opinion. 'Cause I mean, it's just narcissistic to
Yeah.
me. Like everyone has weak spots and shortcomings, guys.
Absolutely.
But if we can do that work and we can break those patterns so that our kids don't have as strong of a response as us, like that's doing better and that's awesome.
Absolutely.
And if we can do that work and not continue that pattern for ourselves, it's just it's to me, it's what it's all about. Like,
Yes.
the
Absolutely.
I never want my babies to go through what I went through, and I'm like,
Absolutely.
learn from all of my stuff, right? Which is
Yes.
why you're doing it. It's like, I
Yes.
especially my children, but the general public as well. I'm like, people, learn from my mistakes.
Yeah.
Stop hating yourself.
Yes.
Stop calling yourself names. You are awesome just the way you are.
Absolutely. And especially for
Find
me,
your tribe.
yes, because I have a daughter, right? Like it's just me
Yeah.
and her. She's turning 15 next month actually, and the crushes are starting, and I know the relationships are going to come, and I'm just like, god, I wish I could just like lock her in a fucking closet for the rest of her life because I don't want her to go through the shit that I went through. But I'm so open and honest with her. Like she knows everything. Like I said before, she was not around when I was in that relationship, but when I came back home, because she was staying with my grandparents when I was living with her grandparents when I was living in Florida, I
Mhm.
told her everything. Like literally, she knew about every single thing that happened to me. We went to therapy together. We are building our relationship because at the end of the day, it's just me and her. And I really
Mhm.
want her to have that trust within me that, God forbid, if she ever finds herself in any type of bad situation, she has the mentality of, I need to call my mom right now so she can help me, as opposed to, I'm fucking terrified to call or to tell my mom what's going on, so let me figure this shit out on my own. And that's
Yeah.
not what I had growing up. Even though my relationship with my parents growing up was beautiful, I didn't grow up in chaos, I didn't grow up in trauma, but I did not feel emotionally safe to talk to them about heavy shit. And I
Are you
snuck around a lot.
where are your parents from?
Puerto Rico. So,
Ah,
old
yes.
school Puerto Rican from the
Yep.
islands came to the mainland for the American dream,
Very strict.
very strict, very,
Children
very
should be
strict.
seen and not heard. You got
Yes,
that too.
yes,
Yes, that's what
absolutely.
I'm Italian. That's what I was raised with.
Yes,
Children
yes.
should be seen and not heard.
We don't talk
You
about
know,
therapy, we don't talk about our emotions. What the fuck is trauma? That's not something that I talked about growing up.
oh, I feel like the mental health piece, especially in like Latino culture,
Yeah,
is like way more like downplayed. It's definitely like, the Italians downplay it too,
yeah,
but I feel like in that Latina culture, it is very much like that's your own shit, and
yes.
especially if you're a second gen,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Like if you're if your parents are first generation immigrants, I have worked with so many people who are like, yeah, no, my parents are like, I like slept in the desert and crawled over things and
Yes,
went through all of this
yes,
trauma. How could you say that your life is traumatic?
yes,
And their kids will say like, I'm being bullied at school or this is happening. And they'll like try to go to their parents to talk to their parents about like these things that are stressing them out. And their parents
yes.
are like, what do you have a reason to be depressed or
Right.
anxious about? Your
Yep,
life is so wonderful.
yep,
Because in their minds, they're like, I came from this hellhole and I brought you to this country
yes,
where at least you got a shot, kid. Now,
yes.
why aren't you appreciating? But
Exactly.
as a child, it just feels like, oh, okay, so I'm just supposed to pretend that everything is fine all the
Right.
time.
And then we turn into people pleasers as we get older.
Yeah.
No, I
It's
get it.
amazing how that
It's
works.
crazy,
It
right?
really.
And then you just gotta pray it away. That's another narrative. Like you just gotta go to church and talk to God and pray it away. There and therapy is for crazy people. Like, no, come on. Let's change the narrative. So, like, my whole point in bringing that up is that I am breaking that cycle with my relationship with my daughter,
Yeah.
that I want her to come to me and talk to me about the good, the bad, the ugly. And if and when she falls, she knows that I'm gonna be there to pick her up. So that's what I'm proud of.
That is something really,
Yeah,
like, that you should be proud of,
yeah.
right? Like, I feel like our purpose here on this earth is to make the next generation better than ours, right?
Mhm.
Like, at least for me, that's my goal. I want to leave the earth better than I walked into it.
Yeah.
And especially with our own kids, like that's where you're gonna make the most greatest amount of
Yep.
change. What if she grows up and is like the next president or wins a
Yes.
Nobel Peace Prize or
Yeah. Yeah.
like ends something horrible that's
Yes.
happening
Yes.
because her mother believed in her. And I think, you know, doing this work for ourselves, even if it's just for ourselves and our families, right? Even though it's really challenging, and that doesn't mean it doesn't come with loss, because it also comes with loss because you're realizing all the people in your life who are toxic and not
Yes.
helpful to you.
Yes.
And that's not always family. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's workplaces, sometimes it's,
It's the man that you sleeping with.
there's a man that you sleep with. Yeah,
Okay.
it can be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But but when you start doing the work, and you start setting those boundaries, sometimes, people that you thought would be accepting are not.
Yes.
And that can be very difficult
Yeah.
too. But I really want to, Leanne, I know you run like these support groups and you support women of domestic violence, correct? So can you speak to our listeners about, those groups and like what you offer, and really the purpose of building that community for you? Because I think it could be a good resource for anyone who's listening right now.
So I haven't done specifically like groups for people to come together, but that's definitely something that I'm envisioning to happen in the future. So thank you for putting that out there because that means I got to make that shit happen. But
Manifest it.
yes, manifesting all of the abundance. But I'm so proud of my podcast because it is a support system for people to just listen to other people's stories of what they've gone through and how they've been able to turn it around. I mean, I've had so many different people come on, not just DV survivors, but just survivors of so many different types of trauma and abuse. And just
Cool.
hearing of the ugliness that they've gone through and how they've been able to turn it into something so beautiful, like that is the purpose. That is the why. And that's why it's called Watch Us Thrive, right? I didn't name it Watch Me Thrive. I didn't name it Watch Leanne Thrive. Like, no, Watch Us Thrive because we all got shit. We all have things that we're healing from. We all have traumas. We all have these things that we're trying to grow from. And I think when we come together as a collective and sit down and have these types of conversations, it just
Yeah.
helps us not feel so alone in the dark moments that we're all going to deal with. So that's what I'm committed to continuing showing up for my community.
Yeah.
I'm just so proud of what I've been able to build from the scariest thing that I've ever gone through. And I made the decision to be like, fuck that. I'm going to change my narrative. So, I always say I'm trying to change the world one conversation at a time. So we're doing it.
But I think it's really important to do that
Yeah.
because so many people in these situations truly feel like they're the only person in this
Yes.
situation. And even just hearing someone else's story, especially with the nature of domestic violence,
Yeah.
right? Because it doesn't start out that the man is punching you in the face every day. Like no one would sign up for that, right?
Nope.
It starts out with he's Prince Charming and he makes you feel super special and you're the center of the universe.
Yep.
And it's usually those of us who never felt important to anyone before.
Yep.
So this person makes you feel like you are the most important, precious thing on earth. And then they start to abuse you. And then you're like, it's confusing. It's confusing. And I think listening to stories is a really good way to help recognize ourselves in them.
Yes.
Like, I think that storytelling is a really good way to just for people to be able to see themselves and wake up before they get there.
Yes.
Like before the train has that destination point.
Absolutely.
It's so, so, so important.
I wish I had my podcast when I was in that relationship.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Do you oh well, he's still in prison.
Yeah, he's
So I
actually
was gonna say,
he's getting out in a couple of months, like less than 90 days.
okay.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that, girl?
In the beginning, when I first found out, it was like, "Oh, fuck." Like, what if he's gonna track me down and find me and try to finish what he started? Like, those are the thoughts that I did have. But I went back to therapy and I talked it out and, you know, now I'm in a much better space that, like, he has no power or control over me anymore. Like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I know he's gonna find the next victim and he's gonna do it again, but that is not my story anymore. Like, I'm able to finally close this chapter of my life and move on and continue to focus healing on me, loving myself so much that I don't attract the same type of person that I used to before. But there's been days that, like, my PTSD gets to me and I can't get out of bed, and then there's other moments that I feel like the baddest bitch in the world, and normal. That's
Nature of the
okay.
beast.
That's
Yeah.
that's just what it is, ladies and gentlemen. There's highs and lows, there's ebbs and flows, but I'm focusing on me. And I think that's what's helping me continue on this journey. Like I'm just pouring so much into my cup that was left empty for so long. And I'm loving the relationship that I'm building with myself. So we're doing good. Today's a good day.
I love that.
Yes.
I have one more question for you
Yeah.
before you go. Okay, so I always ask everyone, what does being good enough mean to you, Leanne?
Mm. Oh man. Being good enough means to me that what I'm doing today, whether it's showing up at 1,000% or showing up at 1%, like that's good enough. Like it's okay. If I don't feel like, posting 1,000 times on my social media or putting out a podcast episode and like just taking a day for myself, that's perfectly fine. Like this is my journey and I'm just committed to doing whatever feels good for me.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I don't give a fuck what anybody else got to say or think. Like I used to be that type of person who would care about outside opinions and judgments and all that. I've been able to build like this I don't give a fuck attitude anymore. And I just love that about myself. So, I mean, just doing whatever the fuck I want, how I want, when I want, that's good enough for me.
I think that is important though, because all of us people pleasers in recovery, that's what we've always struggled with.
Yeah.
Is like if I don't give 100% and I'm not perfect all the time, then I'm not good enough. And I
Yep.
think it's just that, like you said, whether I gave 100% or 1%, if 1% is all that I had left in my battery pack that day, then
Yep.
that was good enough for that day.
Period.
Yeah,
Yep.
period. I love that because there is times that, and I think there's a relation between our productivity and our worth,
Mhm.
especially for those of us people pleasers in the world. And
Mhm.
but there are days that are, especially if you have PTSD, if you have a flare up, there are days that are going to be harder than others.
Absolutely.
And what I've learned in my journey is like, if I try to make my brain work on the days that my brain is like, feels like scrambled eggs,
Yep.
it's it's gonna take me, like, 6 times as long to do the task. So I
Absolutely.
might as well just, like, be like, "Okay, brain needs rest today, body
Yes.
needs rest today.
Yes.
I'm gonna let myself have a chill day. We're gonna take a mental health day, and tomorrow, hopefully, I wake up and I'm in a better mental headspace." And 9 times out of 10,
You
I
are.
usually am
Yes.
because I let my body rest, right? I didn't
Absolutely.
keep adding that stress on, and I think that's what happens to us. Our brains just get so overwhelmed and we go into the burnout mode because we do. And then when we feel that need to rest, we beat on ourselves. So
Yep.
I love that. Whether you gave
Yes.
1% or 100%, you are good enough.
That's good enough.
Leanne, your podcast is called again,
Watch us thrive.
Watch Us Thrive. And where can they find you, girl?
Everywhere. You can listen
Everywhere.
on Apple, Spotify. I'm also on YouTube. So if you're a visual person and you want to watch the episodes under the same handle, Watch Us Thrive. And new episodes premiere every Tuesday. And sometimes I do bonus episodes if I'm feeling spicy on Fridays. But yeah, every Tuesday there's a brand new episode.
Are bonus episodes just you or bonus episodes
Yes.
are you?
Yes.
Oh, so it's
Yes.
like bonus episodes is like Leanne has some tea for
I
y'all
got some
today and
shit to
something.
talk about. Like when the
Yeah.
whole Cassie and Diddy situation happened, ugh, I was on 1,000 and I had to record a whole solo episode just talking about that. But yeah, every Tuesday.
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this
Oh,
because I
girl,
feel like I would so vibe.
girl, that shit was a mess. I had a lot to say.
Oh my gosh. Well, Leanne, it's been wonderful having you on. Thank you for coming on
Thank
today. And to
you.
our listeners, I want to remind you guys that you are good enough. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Good Enough with the Trauma Therapist. We appreciate you listening. While our host may provide some personal and professional advice, we want to remind you that this show is for entertainment purposes only. Each individual situation is unique, and Good Enough is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you need a therapist and are located in New York or Missouri, feel free to reach out to us at liendr.com or resilient-mo